All right, we are live. Gonna give it a couple minutes, let people filter in. Hello, very early people. Let me hit some music. Hello, everyone. Hello. All right, everyone. Welcome back to a very special episode of Philosophy Friday. This week, I have a very special guest. I'd like to introduce Dr. Shannon Grimes, professor of religion at Meredith College, and a person who is maybe one of the most informed people in the English-speaking world about Zosimus of Panopolis. Thank you for joining us today, Dr. Grimes.
Oh, thank you for having me, CT. And hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be here with you today.
Even in our little pre-stream setup call, we were already talking about how wonderful it is that so many people want to come learn about this stuff. So, why don't we just jump in? In
Sure.
in our previous Philosophy Friday, we introduced Zosimus of Panopolis, and as with any good scholarly endeavor into history, oh, people are saying that you are much louder than me. Let me see if I can't solve that.
I have a quiet voice, too.
It might be your microphone. Okay.
Ah,
How does Dr. Grimes sound now, chat?
do I need to do anything here?
No, 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 no. I handle all this. Okay, people are saying it's much
Okay.
better. Perfect.
Okay, good.
Okay, as with any good scholarly endeavor in history, we raised more questions than we answered. But I realized that, you know, you can just shoot scholars an email and ask them to be on the show. CT is rather quiet. Audio. Okay, people are saying audio balance is good. So I was hoping you could do the same. I have a list of questions that people are curious about, as well as a lot of things that I'm curious about on my own. So why don't we just jump in? So
Please do.
okay. My main question, the thing, I have a copy of your book sitting right here on my desk in front of me. The main thing that I was curious about is, was Zosimus, how unique was he? It seems like he was very well read, interested in a lot of things. Was he like his own thing? Like, was he a just one weirdo off in a corner with very unique opinions on alchemy? Or were there other people who kind of saw alchemy like he did? It, in a way that's closer to like the like an Al-Razi, where he's like one of many teachers who were interested in like talking about alchemy in a particular way.
Okay, that's a good question. And you know, it's a guessing to
Yeah.
some extent. So within the text that we have, all right, the Greco-Egyptian alchemical corpus, he
Mm-hmm.
is unique in that he is the only one that really discusses theology in great detail. The other writings will talk about philosophy, and they'll muse a little bit about the underworld, or a little bit with mythology, but not alchemy as a path to like spiritual liberation in the same way that Zosimos does.
Yes.
So in that
In
respect, he's unique.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
Was he unique for his time? I don't think he necessarily was, because, as I argue in my book, I think alchemy comes out of the Egyptian priesthood,
Mm-hmm.
where they were making divine statues of gods. And so, in order to do that kind of work, you had to be spiritually pure. It involved probably all kinds of rituals. We don't know exactly what they are, but the opening of the mouth is a ritual that they use to animate the statues with divine presence. And so, the religious aspects of alchemy may not be that new, but Zosimos, in the time period, which is around 275 of the Common Era,
Mm-hmm.
he's interested in Hermetism and Gnosticism, and all of those are relatively new ideas, and they're challenging traditional religion, traditional Egyptian religion, traditional Greek religion, etc., Christianity, Judaism. Um, they're changing the conversation, and so he's also unique in that way. Like other Egyptian priest alchemists before him would not have had that Gnostic or Hermetic bent.
Right, right. It's uh in one of the things that I'm part of why I'm doing all this research is that I'm trying to write an accessible introduction to Western esotericism, and the word I use to describe him is idiosyncratic, and
Okay.
that seems appropriate. Like he kind of has. It seems like to me, he's taking a lot of these very diverse ideas that were in the air at the time, but his take on them, his opinion of them, and how they should be applied to alchemy does seem fairly unique. Does that align with how you see him?
Yeah, I do think he's unique, and he's definitely opinionated.
Oh,
He can't.
certainly.
He's kind of grumpy in his works. He's arguing against how other people do it, and I'm trying to argue for his own perspective and his own technique, or not so much technique as it is a worldview or an approach
Yeah,
to alchemy.
it seems it's almost like a combination of like academic theories about how you should approach alchemy combined with like religious cosmology. Actually, that's a good
Yeah.
question. Do you think his surliness goes beyond normal kind of academic disagreement with your colleagues and into something like more intense?
I think there's more at stake for him.
Hmm.
Because I do think it is a kind of academic disagreement with colleagues in a way, but at the same time, there are new economic channels that have opened up for metallurgy in his time period, or 100 years before his time. So it used to be all controlled by the temple. All the metals, they could only be at the temple, and only certified, priests. Or certified is not quite the right word, but you know what I mean. Only
Right,
authorized,
right.
associated and hired by the temple could work with the metals. So access, as I've been studying alchemy and trying to figure out what they were doing, I wrote a whole dissertation on Zosimos for my doctoral degree, and I still wasn't sure kind of what they were doing.
Right, right. Well,
So as
it's
I
all
went back,
it's all
oh, go
wrapped
ahead.
in like even the texts that we have are all wrapped in very mysterious language. And actually, one thing I was very curious about was in your book you mentioned that like it's you made this point that like it wasn't necessarily about creating gold, although that wasn't not a part of what Zosimus was doing. You mentioned that gold itself, like how they understood gold back in the first century and how they understood metals in general, was very different than how we understand gold today. Is there anything you can expand on that there?
Sure. So I'm quoting an old, like 1920s alchemy scholar who says that when he was reading, and his name's A.J. Hopkins, when he was reading the Greco-alchemical Egyptian or Greco-Egyptian alchemical corpus, he was struck by how it was full of color words, you know?
Hmm.
And so to think about alchemy as changing base metals into gold in this time period anyway is a very, very limited angle. They were coloring metals. And after I finished my dissertation, after that, and I was done, a bunch of scholarships started to come out from art historians that talked about, they were looking at these alchemical writings and trying to figure out the techniques they were using for coloring metals, because apparently that was a very famous aspect of Egyptian metallurgy, is that they could color the metals. And I'm not talking about just putting like glazes on them, or bronzing, although part of it was bronzing, but like making a metal blue, like from within the metal itself, drawing a color out from the metal. And there are not many examples of metal statuary left from the ancient Egyptian world, because they've been looted and
Right,
melted
looting.
down, etc. But the ones that we do have, they've done X-ray technology, and they have been able to like see beneath all the patina, they can see the colors of the metals and they were vibrant. And you can still see traces of some of it. Again, it's hard to see with all the patina. Um,
Hmm.
there's some stuff from King Tut's tomb, for example, like a purple color gold that when that was unearthed and being written about like in the 60s, they couldn't figure out how they did that, how they made that.
Right, right.
It was
It's my
gold.
understanding that some of these like colored metals that we've recovered from Egyptian tombs, like we still don't entirely know how they did that.
Right. And it's the work of art historians and technicians, you know.
Hmm.
Um, it's again a collaboration between art and science here to try to figure this out, what they were doing. But when I started to read those art history pieces, I I had to write about that in my chapter because uh, it reinforced my ideas that Zosimos was a statue making priest. And then here's all these examples of people looking at statuary and seeing these multicolored aspects of them. So gold, to get back to your early question about
Yes, yes.
gold, um, gold was anything gold colored, and you could have various. It's not like people didn't know what gold was. It came out of the ground, but to make something gold doesn't necessarily mean changing like a base metal into the metal gold. You know, they weren't necessarily talking about it in that, but coloring it gold. So, gold, as you I'm sure know, is a very soft metal. So, you can't use it a lot. I mean, for smaller artworks and things, it's fine, but for like gold pillars or larger works in architecture, for example, gates,
Hmm.
think of big temple gates, right? You wanted a gold color because that was a divine color, but you couldn't use necessarily gold metal for that because it's too soft um, to work. So they were um, coloring different metals gold to make it look golden.
Right, right. And it's so there was a sense that like by coloring these workable blacksmith metals in gold, they didn't literally think like we are literally making this into gold. Like we are not transforming this metal into literal gold, but there there is kind of a softer categorization as like we are. Would you describe it as like we are making a type of gold by
Yeah,
performing this
maybe.
operation?
Sure. I think, like, I don't want to rule out that they didn't think it was a kind of gold, right? A type of gold is a nice way to describe it, I think,
Mm-hmm. Actually,
because it's not
uh,
that they're
Ble-
turning it into the metal that's in the ground.
Blevraz in chat asks a good question. How good were they at telling apart gold from gold-colored metals? Like, how relevant was that distinction to them? Is that even something that we know?
Yeah, they did have ways of testing metals back then. They could test if something was pure gold. There are like, I can't remember the names of it. I'm sorry off the top of my head. This happens when you get older. You don't remember things as well.
Oh, don't worry.
Um, it's a cupellation. That's the word. Cupellation
Yes.
test or cupellation test. So they had things like that back in the ancient world where they could tell if something was, how pure the gold was. They had ways of purifying gold,
Right.
making it different carat weights, etc.
Right. Right. That was one of the biggest questions that I had. It was like, wait, if they could tell when gold was fake, then they knew that they weren't like producing gold from scratch because they know like, oh no, I'm just adding gold to like a bronze alloy, and like,
Mhm.
yeah, there's more mass, but I know that I'm not making pure gold.
Right.
So okay, next question. Let's see. So a lot of Zosimus's alchemical techniques and worldview were clearly very influential on future alchemists. Uh, did did his philosophy like get carried, like what parts of his philosophy got carried forward, do you think?
Oh my gosh. Well, the idea that alchemy and religion are interconnected and that to purify the soul, purifying the metals and purifying the soul have some equivalency.
Hmm.
So I think that is a big idea that carried forward. Also, uh, one of the interesting things about Zosimos is his relationship with Theosebia. And
Yes.
Most of his writings take the form of letters to her. So in Arabic alchemical texts, I think you talked about this when you did your Zosimos podcast last time.
Mm-hmm.
There's a book called the Book of Pictures, Mushafa Shawar. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly
Me
at
neither.
all. Anyway, let's just go with it, okay?
We'll take a rain
So
check.
in this Arabic text, that's one of the first time we get alchemical images. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen alchemical artwork. It was very popular, especially in the Renaissance era
Oh,
in
yes.
Europe. Okay, but the Book of Pictures is one of the first that we have examples of alchemical, like artwork as an allegory for the alchemical process. And Zosimos and Theosebia are the subjects of this collection of artwork. And so the idea that we see in medieval Renaissance European alchemy about the alchemical king and queen, the sun and the moon,
Mm-hmm.
and the marriage of the two to become one being, sometimes described as hermaphroditic or the rebus.
Mm-hmm.
Y'all know what I'm talking about?
Yes, yes. Well, I
That
do.
imagery, that imagery comes from Zosimos. Not from Zosimos. That doesn't appear in Zosimos' text, but appears as Arabic alchemists imagined his relationship with Eusebia, they are depicted as the Sun King and the Moon Queen in dialogue. And
That is fascinating. I did not know that.
and so that imagery of the two of them form the basis for the alchemical imagery of the alchemical king and queen.
That is, again, very interesting. I did not know that.
I have an article on this if you're interested. What do I call it? Zosimos in Theosebia and Erotics of Pedagogy, something like that.
Oh, that's an excellent title. I'm sure I can track it down. I can.
It's on academia. I have all my articles on academia, so
Oh, wonderful.
you can find.
Okay. So, here's another question from chat. I'm not really familiar with alchemy or Zosimus, so this may be a rather basic question to answer. What did Zosimus believe the end point of alchemy to be? Would this differ from the aims of future alchemists?
The end point of alchemy. Well, that's a good question because whatever, there's the technical aspect. So whatever you're making is making.
Mm-hmm.
And he was making various things. So I can't say there was a particular endpoint as far as the technology was concerned or the chemistry aspect.
Mm-hmm.
But for him, the endpoint of alchemy in a spiritual sense was to realize the divine self within not only you, but within all things. The divine, the one within the all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That makes total sense, especially given his clear familiarity with late Platonism and the fundamental oneness of all things.
Yes.
Oh, here's a good question. Is there a misunderstanding about your field that you enjoy hearing people believe, or is there one that fills you with particular anger?
That's a good question.
Right. I thought that was fun.
And about my field, you're talking alchemy, I'm assuming?
Or more in general.
Okay. So alchemy, I guess the idea that, changing lead into gold is a common stereotype. So I love to debunk that stereotype whenever I get the chance because it was so much more than that. One thing, there's nothing that gets me really angry. I'm just not a person that gets really angry about stuff. So I guess when people interpret it as somehow being evil or as somehow being only involved with metalwork and chemistry and that it's not at all spiritual. And some people, especially after the scientific revolution, have tried to distance alchemy from science. And so to diminish what the alchemists were doing. A lot of great scientific discoveries came out of alchemy, and before the scientific revolution, and we're talking about the late 1700s, a lot of science was done with a religious focus in mind. To know the
Exactly.
world, to know how the world works, is to know God's design and God's plan, in other
Exactly.
words.
A very, very common idea in the Islamic world in regards to alchemy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, here's a good question. Did alchemy here from Baconside in chat? Did alchemy have many ties to healing? If at first it was seen as a way to achieve a form of divine interaction.
Mm. So, metal alchemy, probably not. But when you think about the broader goals, and certainly for ancient Egyptian statue makers, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're making it possible for the divine to you're giving it a vehicle to shine through. And so the products they were making could have healing powers. There's
Mm.
plant alchemy, spagyrics,
Yes,
uh,
yes.
but they don't talk about that as much. In the ancient world, the collection of texts that we have is mostly about metals.
I
So they weren't.
associate alchemy
Go
and
ahead.
healing more with like the Paracelsian corpus because he was a
Yeah,
doctor, like just straight up.
exactly. That comes much later, where you see that more explicit connection. But there's a spiritual healing, I would say. Zosamos, for example, recommends to Theosebia to meditate, to get over, as a means of getting over her anger and all the so-called impurifications of the soul, like greed and suffering. Meditation as a way. So that, depending on how you think of healing, right? That's a form of healing.
Right, right. Okay, Maria Hebrea and Pseudo-Democritus. Uh, do we know do we know if these are actual works Zosimus is quoting, or is he engaging in a bit of like the sort of thing the Hermetics would do sometime, where they kind of make up an ancient source for wisdom clout?
It seems to me that he's quoting certain things from um, Pseudo Democritus, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But I think quoting, like they didn't have the same customs that we do now, like to put things in quotation marks and have it be exact. It's more like paraphrasing,
Right, right. That
I
makes
would
sense.
say. Yeah, so paraphrasing and alluding. He quotes a lot of works in that way. He does seem to be reading these texts. And as far as Maria Hebrea, I mean, I think all we know about her is through her so-called quotations from Zosimos
Mm-hmm.
and other writers. So we don't have any of those works. I don't think she was made up, though.
Yes, I just revisited the section in your book about her. Like there was, seems like there was a lot of scholarly disagreement as to like how involved the how involved the Jewish community was in alchemy. Some people say they weren't, and some people say they were like widespread. And it seems like the truth of the matter was fairly specific. And you draw allusions to the Babylonian Talmud and how they mention that like somewhere around this area, the if there were Jewish alchemists, they probably would have been associated with those trade guilds.
Right. Yeah, so they probably, again, with access to metals being, for me, that was a game changer when I started thinking about it that
Mm,
way, is who had access, like what were metallurgists, not thinking about alchemists, but what were metallurgists doing in these days?
that's a
And
very
that's
good
when
point. Yeah.
I discovered how limited the access was to metals and how controlled that access was.
No,
And
you're
so
kind of giving me like a secondhand like epiphany here. Like, yeah, you kind of need metal to do metallurgy, don't you?
you do. And so, and metals are expensive. So, how were they getting them? And what were they doing with them? All that equipment, all the furnaces, you need space, you need laboratory,
Yes, yeah.
stuff to
Again,
do
something
them.
that carries forward into the Islamic world. Like literally the first like fifth of everything that Al Razi writes is like, hey, make sure you're doing this in a room with windows and you have enough money to buy your ingredients.
Yeah. A room with
don't
windows,
don't
definitely
huff
good
metal
advice.
fumes.
But
That
so access, and so trade guilds only came about for metallurgy in the Roman period. That was not part of the economy. It was all done in the temples, as I said earlier.
right,
So
right.
the trade guilds are fairly new, and that's really changing the economic landscape of how metals were created and produced and sold. So you could now be part of trade guilds. And so the Jewish alchemists were not priests, so they weren't, it's a relatively newer aspect of this. They were probably involved with the trade guilds.
Mm-hmm. And part of all of this, not just the physical like equipment that you need to do metallurgy and alchemy, is the expertise, the knowledge, which seems to
Yes.
be, you make an excellent argument that the sort of esotericism of alchemy is, it comes from these more practical concerns of like, well, it used to be that the only people who knew how to do these fancy metallurgy techniques were the temple priests, and so they had to, if you're looking for a job in metallurgy, you gotta keep those techniques a secret. But if you want to teach people, you got to figure out a way to talk about it without really talking about it, you know?
Exactly, trade secrets.
Exactly.
And how that leads very well into esotericism.
Okay, Tanuki Theater in chat says, how did they cook stuff and do metallurgy without easy access to glass bulbs? It's my understanding that they had access to glassware.
Yeah, oh yeah, glass is an ancient art. In fact, there's the alchemy of glass making.
Yes. There's actually...
Beretta, I can't remember his first name. Beretta wrote a nice work on that.
Yeah, actually, the sort of 20th century, like more mystical writer, Fulcanelli, he has a whole section about how he, like his work is like half riven with mythology and mysticism and stuff, but he makes a huge point of talking about the importance of these like these spagyric glass workers in Greece and how important they were to the broader mythology of alchemy. So yeah, they had access to glass.
Absolutely, and they were making gemstones too, so that
Yes.
we have alchemical recipes for making like, what do you call it, like faux emeralds and rubies and things like that. So that's all done with glass. So they had glass work, and also, I can't speak as much to the technical aspects. I am a religion scholar, and so when I studied Zosimos, that was my main priority, was looking at the religious and philosophical angles. So a lot about technical aspects of alchemy, I really don't know. But certainly they did have large furnaces, and you can still see ruins of some of these at Egyptian, like big Egyptian workshops where they had metalworking in large furnaces. And grounds as in areas, for making
Right.
larger works, for example, and things made of clay. It's really cool to think about how they did things back then, because they, you didn't have a way to gauge temperature like you do now.
Right. There's so many different techniques for applying heat in specific ways.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Here's a good question. A lot of Greco-Egyptian writings have a very pessimistic perspective, often viewing the world and Egypt specifically as like a kind of a fallen state. But by contrast, Zosimus seems very optimistic. Why do you think that is? If you agree.
I think that's a great question. And so this is something, even when you look at Gnostic texts and Hermetic texts, which are the two major philosophical influences, I would say, philosophical/spiritual influences in Zosimos's work. Even if you read those, the Gnostics, for example, have a ton of writings famously that are very anti-cosmic, one might say. You want to escape this world, you want to escape the cosmos, and all the good stuff is outside the cosmic realm, up in the highest heavens, outside of the material world. And some of the Hermetic texts talk about it that way too. Even Zosimos himself at times says, spit on matter and flee to, where your home is.
Yeah, he's putting all these metals in the oven because he hates them and he wants to punish them.
But it's a really complex idea. Some people did think that way. But then other people, even there's some Gnostic texts that are very pro-cosmic, that talk about like it's a matter of perspective.
Right,
where
right.
you attach to material things and to like a superficial perspective. And so accessing the deeper, more spiritual understanding helps you see the world in a different way, as being full of gods.
Right,
or
right.
full of the divine mind. So I think that's what Zosimos ultimately believes. But in some cases, like in the Hermetic text, you see this a lot. Um, there's probably an order to which they read them, and there's something about having to separate oneself from matter. You separate the spirit from the matter. That's alchemical too, distillation, right? You
Right,
separate
right.
the vapors from the matter um, in order to have it return in a more perfect form.
I it, even just personally, it's like to me, it feels like it would be hard to be a professional alchemist without enjoying matter in some way. I know that Zosimus said you should spit on matter, reject it, but at the same time, it's like you're spending all of your time thinking about it and interacting with it.
Exactly. And at times he's like, there's this one thing I love, it just a little short excerpt from his where he's looking at Mercury and he's talking about how it reflects the one and the all. And it's just this wonderful little loving meditation about how Mercury just reveals the divine in itself. So he doesn't hate matter. It's I don't know what you would call it. It's like a teaching tool. Just like in the alchemical process, you have to go through grado, right? That where
Right.
everything is icky. It's the blackening and it's the darkness. And if you've read Zosimos' work, his visions, excuse me, it's called On Excellence or the Visions of Zosimos. Pardon me, I
Mm-hmm.
have to cough here. Excuse me, sorry.
Oh, you're totally fine.
Okay. Um, when you read that, it's like being in a nightmare. You know,
Yes,
things are like
it's
images are
scary and
melting
violent. Yes.
before your eyes, and people are being burned in vats, and it's this horrible imagery. But that's the first stage in alchemy. You have to kind of again be grossed out by matter, spit on it, so that the spirit can flee. But the spirit can't flee and just stay there and hang out in the noetic realms, in the supernal highest divine realms. It needs to come back and do something in the world. It needs to come back and alter the metal. It needs to perfect the metal. It needs to
Right.
be recognized in yourself, in the body. Again, realizing self, the divine mind in all things.
Which, from my understanding, is reflected in the actual chemical processes by like a lot of the Negredo stage of things was like inducing fermentation by burying your substrate in like manure and then putting it in the kiln. Like it was even within the alchemy a physically kind of gross process.
Yeah, yeah, right. I mean, yeah, they're using manure and urine and all. Yeah.
Right. And it's like there was like a practical chemical purpose to it, but like as the person doing it, it's yucky.
Sure, and it probably smells, the metallic fumes and things. It's metallurgy is no, I have never been a metallurgist, so I don't know
Oh,
firsthand,
me
but
neither.
it's apparently a very smelly work.
Yes. Actually, okay. That brings up a good question with the whole imagery thing. In his second lesson, he mentions a barber. What's up with the barber? Like, what? I understand why it's like it's part of the dream imagery, but like, what exactly are the cultural connotations of a barber at this period?
Okay, so it depends on the context, I guess. So the barber, it's a that's often how it's translated, but it's a razor working man. That's the
Oh,
literal. So it's a razor working man. And so it could be associated with the idea of a barber. And back in those days, barbers did bloodletting, right?
ah, yes.
That was a main form of healing. That's so that could be Young translates it as barber, I think.
Hmm.
Um, but a razor working man is somebody who's cutting open the body, and it seems to have associations with the mortuary priest and the
Oh,
preparation,
interesting.
the mummification of the body.
That is interesting.
So yeah.
Very interesting. Are there any pre-Zosimus Egyptian texts that you would consider alchemical or metallurgic?
Any so well, he's using things like Pseudo Democritus, so we have writings of him. But as far as it, like really Egyptian, as far as priesthood, is that what you mean?
I this is a question from chat, so I don't know exactly what they mean, but I
Okay.
why don't we talk about we can discuss that. Like the term priest is often used to describe like a lot of people in the Alexandrian milieu at this point, but it seems like there's a lot of different things that priest meant.
Absolutely. So, yes, this is one thing. If I'm going to call Zosimos a priest, right?
Mm-hmm.
How, in what, on what grounds can I do that? So again, studying metallurgy, when I shifted like to my thinking to what are they trying to do? What I was looking at it culturally. So I call my book on Zosimos a cultural biography because we can only know so much about him as a person, right? He doesn't say a whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to like flesh out culturally. So what he was he doing? What did metallurgists do back then? So um and I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought.
Oh, you're totally fine. It's early.
Bring me back to the question.
Um, like like what when people call Zosimus a priest, what did that
Oh
mean
yeah.
at this
Okay.
period?
Thank you, the priest. All right. So metallurgists, all artisans that worked for the temple were priests of some sort. Now there are many different levels of education and training and things like that, but they were technically priests.
Mm-hmm.
And people like Zosimos, who were also scribes, Zosimos talks a lot about how he's translating ancient texts from other priests and um, having to go get them, find them in the storage rooms of the temples, etc.
Hmm.
Uh, they were a lesser rank of priests, but they seem to have worked for the House of Life, which was an annex to the temple, and it's very little is known about the House of Life. Did they even have buildings? Did they was it just kind of like a group of people who had a designation?
Mm-hmm.
Certainly they would have had a scriptorium, but they were like the librarians. They were it's kind of like the an ancient version of a university in some way.
Right, right.
And
Uh,
so the artisans were under the supervision of the House of, and Zosimos seems to have been I think he was a priest of the House of Life because he was an artisan and because he was a scribe. So that's where he would fit in the temple world. Um,
right, right.
but
Oh,
not the same thing as a priest who would be responsible for like, doing all the worship or leading festivals. Those are very different kinds of priests.
right, right. Vaguely similar to how there's like a Catholic priest who leads mass versus like a cleric who works in the scribal aspect of a church, just kind of translating
Right.
texts and keeping records.
Yes, they had different yeah, different jobs.
Uh, okay, Monks and Maenads in chat asks, so was Zosimus doing like bureaucratic work or was he like translating things? I get the sense that he was doing more intellectual work. Like he was, in the book you mentioned that he was probably translating something.
Yeah, he was translating things. Although it's a really good question because administrative work was also done by the House of Life. They were keepers of records. They would have written all the business contracts and things like that too. So he may have had to do some work along those lines. I just don't know for sure.
Hmm. Okay. Here's an excellent question. Was Nilos actually that bad? Zosimus rails against this guy. And
Yes.
I'm even after reading all of this and I'm still not entirely clear what Zosimus's specific beef with Nilos was. So, like, what exactly was it? Okay, in your book, you mentioned that like it was probably a rivalry over Theosebia. Like she was potentially a patron, someone that Zosimus was trying to teach. Um, but I'm curious, what exactly was it about Nilos that Zosimus thought was so bad?
It's really hard to tell because where we do know something specific. First of all, Nelos is said to have he's making something. He's showing, I think, Paphnutius how to make something, and it doesn't turn out. Okay, so he's see this guy's a poser or whatever you want to call him.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But there's in this text called On the Letter Omega, Zosimos is very specific about this group of alchemists that he really is objecting to because of their particular use of astrology in the work, as in summoning astrological demons, um, daimons, to assist with the process. And he really doesn't like that approach. And even though Zosimos also uses a type of in his work, astrology in the sense of like you make gold at the summer in the summertime because that's when the sun is at its highest. So he's using like correspondences.
Zosimus's or Nilos's?
Zosimos's, but
Mm-hmm.
Nilos is, I think it's Nilos. He doesn't mention Nilos, so it's hard to tell if this is the same group that he's railing against. So back to the Nilos question. But if it is the same group of alchemists that he's having a problem with, the problem is largely that they're bypassing kind of older natural methods of doing things, which again are looking at seasonal timing, astrological timing too, as far as star timing, like the rising of Sirius, for example. And instead, they are using a more newfangled astrology. Ideas about the star demons, for example, were relatively new in that time period. And he doesn't like that. It's not traditional.
Right. There is a sense that Zosimus is a bit of a conservative when it comes to the remnants of the temple cults and whatever. He seems to have a sort of allegiance to. It's like, well, this is how they used to be done, and this is how they should be done. Would you agree?
In some ways, yes, but in other ways, he's radically, like with the Hermetic and Gnostic teachings, he is radically reimagining religion at the same time. But he's also talking about this reimagining as a purer form of the religion.
Ah, yes. One of the many techniques to do new stuff and call it old.
Yep, exactly.
Let's see. There was.
These are great questions.
Yeah. No. Good job, chat. By the way, you're impressing the professor. So if you guys have any more, we've basically gotten through all the big ones. So I just kind of want to pick your brain now.
Sure.
And chat, feel free to ask Dr. Grimes questions.
Can I also say, too, there are no such thing as stupid questions or too basic of a question. I'm a teacher, and wherever you are, whatever you and anyway, I just don't want you to feel like shy or embarrassed about asking a question.
Yes.
No, it's okay. I'm not expecting you to do that.
We're all having fun here. Okay, actually, you mentioned that Zosimus saw Nilos as maybe rejecting the natural processes of the world in regards to his alchemy. In your book, your dissertation, you talk a lot about what exactly natural meant to Zosimus. Do you think you could elaborate on that? Because it feels like a term with a lot of nuance to it in this case.
So, meaning that things are in harmony with nature. And this is a very ancient Egyptian idea, and it is related to the concept and to the goddess of Maat, M-A-A-T.
Ah, yes.
Which means like cosmic order. It can mean justice. She's worshipped as a goddess, but and it's like a of ethics. You're supposed to speak Maat, do Maat, be Maat, right? And it's all about living in harmony with the divine order. And so that seems to be the basis for the natural method that Zosimos is practicing. You do certain things at certain times of the year because that's when the energies are, right for doing so. Mm-hmm. And we still do that when we plant. You plant something, that you can't just plant it whenever you want, right? Certain times of year are better for planting than others. So it's just based on this observation of the cycles of nature and doing work in harmony with that. And that's what he means, I think, by natural method.
So what would be an example of what would be unnatural to Zosimus? What would be out of harmony with Maat?
Where maybe you're not doing work at the appropriate seasonal time, but instead calling upon these astrological demons to help you be successful in the work. So meaning that you think you can bypass the wisdom of nature and the cosmic order of things by calling upon these demons. But for him, the demons only know a certain part of nature. They're not the whole of nature, right? So
Oh,
you need to understand nature as a whole, right? And as a
very
whole system.
interesting. Yeah, there was, because that was another thing that stood out to me. It's like he talks about Nilos like summoning these malicious astrological spirits for his alchemy, but he doesn't tell Theosebia, never do this again. It taints Nilos' alchemy, and the wisdom is poison forever. He says no. We should study. Like, it doesn't make it like sinful or ritually impure. It's kind of a lesser, incomplete form of the work. And I thought that
Yeah.
was fascinating, because like if you told like a medieval alchemist that somebody was summoning astrological demons to perform their alchemy, they'd say that guy's in league with the devil. You can't trust anything he says.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's to him it's complete. You want to have a picture of the one and the all. So just focusing on a particular demon of one particular area, degree of, for example, that demon, that spirit is not, he's calling on like the all, right?
Right,
The
right.
highest divine is present in all things. And so you could see how that, yeah, calling on that one demon for success to bring you good luck or not, or to perpetuate that one little, is ridiculous from his perspective.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, here's another good question. I know we don't have many of the letter writings. We only have on the letter Omega. Is his kind of Greek letter interpretations based on an older tradition? Like, are there other people that were writing kind of symbolically evocative works about Greek letters?
So this is a really good question, and there's a lot of un there's a lack of clarity, I guess, about
Hmm.
all of this. So it's not clear that Zosimos ever wrote. He's said to have written a book of alchemy for each letter of the alphabet. Okay, and that's a reference, I think, in the 10th century, pseudo 10th century.
Hmm.
Anyway, I'm talking off the top of my head, so I'd have to go back and double check my facts there, but I think it's around the 10th century. We do have a couple, there's a letter Kappa, for example. We do have a couple of them with letters, but we're not sure that Zosimos wrote them that way. And
I
that's just
see.
not, a later collector maybe organized his teachings.
I see. I see. Oh, here, Blevres in chat brings up a good question. What's up with all the imagery of eyes in his vision? Like both clear and bleeding. Was there something particularly evocative about that imagery for, a temple priest at the time, or was that more unique to him?
That's a really good question. Um, yeah, so there's the bleeding eyes, right? It's the one part that I can think of where he mentions the eyes the most when he's gazing upon Agathodemon.
Yes, and I
Which,
know Agathodimon is generally associated with eyes, even outside of Zosimus.
oh, I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah, actually, okay, now that I say that, it might be because of Zosimus, but I remember seeing emblems later where there's depictions of Agathodimon where he's covered with eyes.
Oh, very cool. All right, I'm gonna have to look this up. Thank you for this tip.
Yeah, damn, me too. Good question,
So,
chat.
I mean, yeah, really good question. The gazing for a long time. I mean, on one level, it's describing alchemical work. Something's taking a long time to coalesce, and it's very bright and brilliant. Okay, and then the
Hmm.
eyes filling with blood is when that thing that was stable, it took a long time to be stable, gazing at him for a long time, then it gets like, what do you call it? Well, it finishes it starts to transform into something else. And this is the onset, the when he's gazing at this Agathodemon, he's a dazzling white figure. Okay, so
Hmm.
it's moving from the white, the albedo phase of, into the rubedo phase, which is the highest stage of alchemy, the reddening. And so I interpreted the eyes filling with blood as the transition, because this
Right,
thing that
right.
he's looking at is still an object. It's still outside of himself. And in the rubedo stage, spiritually speaking, there is no division between subject and object.
Right, right. And also, it's like a white sclera filling with a red fluid.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense. So I asked you this a little bit before we went live, but did you ever consider that you would have fans?
No. And I mean, I don't even consider it now that I have fans, but if I do, that's very flattering.
I think I can speak for everyone here that like very very excited to like hear you talk about this, and because it really is like it it's shocking that for a figure in Western esotericism that is so foundational, so, like, you know, you even talk about it in your book, like the invention of religious alchemy is attributed to Zosimus of Panopolis, and I think that's a fair attribution. Like, and yet it seems like very little people study him.
Right. Well, it's hard to study him because it's all in other languages. Very
Right.
little of his work has been translated into English, and only certain texts. So yeah, I would love for more people to to look at this stuff. It also depends on how you look at it, right? So there are historians of scientists that were originally the ones to study this material.
Hmm.
So they didn't get as deeply or think as deeply about the religious aspect, which is perfectly fine. That's not their field. I am looking at it more deeply from a religious and philosophical perspective because that's my background, but I'm glossing over the chemistry. So you need, or I don't know much about art history or those kinds of techniques. So you need a lot of different people from a lot of different fields weighing in on these topics in order to get a fuller picture.
Right, right. Chad is saying, like, waving a giant foam finger that says number one Dr. Shannon Grimes fan.
Oh, it's sweet.
Yeah. uh, it's like I said, like people are excited to learn about this stuff. It like there is interest out there, and it makes me very happy that people are able to like congregate in one place to learn about all this stuff, because it's always interesting to like being able to pick the brains of a someone who's more of an expert than I am.
Well, it makes me happy. So, one of the things that I'm starting to work on, none of this is in place yet, but I have been asked by a group called Domus Hermeticus,
Hmm.
who they are an alchemy school that are using the works of Dennis William Hawk and that system.
Hmm.
They're working with him. Anyway, they're developing an alchemy school, and so they've asked me to do some online classes, which I'm going to. And then some of us are working on another foundation, Hermetic. Um,
Sorry, you're cutting out a bit.
oh, sorry, it's the Hermetic Foundation.
Yes,
But
yes.
I can't remember if that's what we decided we're calling it. But anyway, there's plans to do more online courses in these kinds of topics. I would love to teach them because I don't get at my teaching job. I'm teaching all kinds of religion, Asian religion, ethics, and Bible and all kinds of stuff. But I'm not teaching courses on alchemy. That's not curriculum. So I would love the opportunity to work with people who are really, really interested in this stuff and pass
Right.
along what little I know.
Right, right. It's part of why I've wanted to write a book about all of this stuff so bad, is that there is such like intense interest in it, and but also like there's so many people who know so much about these very niche areas of history, and they want to tell people about it.
Yeah, I think that's true. And it's hard. I work at a women's college in the South, and I have been there for almost 20 years, for 19
Oh
years.
wow.
And this fall is the first time in my entire time there that I'm going to be teaching a course on magic, science, and religion. And I will get to talk about alchemy. First time in almost 20 years. And it's because the time is right. When I first started there, it was very much I'm in the Bible Belt, and so a course like that would not have flown at all.
Right, right. Yeah,
But times are changing. Raleigh is changing. I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina, and so I'm able to offer a course like this now. At this
right.
time.
I'm every time I talk to somebody in academia who's offering a class like that, it's always like I they have too many signups to count. Like it's a packed class.
Oh yeah, it filled like the first day. I think
I
it went.
That's wonderful. That's absolutely wonderful. So we're about to wrap up. Before we do though, is there anything, like, if you want the audience to come away with anything from this, like, is there anything that you really want to drill into people's heads?
Oh my gosh. I don't want to drill anything into your heads. I want you to have open, curious minds. Um, I'm really grateful that you're thinking about Zosimos and interested in learning about him. And there's this whole really cool world out there, ancient alchemy and really cool ancient topics that I hope people get excited about.
Yeah, no, me too. Oh, well, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Grimes. This has been truly incredible, and I have your email now, and I will be asking you questions at random intervals.
You are more than welcome to do so. It has been such a pleasure to be with you today, and I thank all of you for attending.
Excellent. Again,
And
thank you so much. And to chat, thank you for attending, and I think I will catch you next week. Bye, everyone.